basically the long and short is they had asked me to kind of talk to you guys a little bit about basic critical care, basic ventilator, basic hemodynamics, why we use some of the stuff that we do. So none of this focuses on the specifics of the brain. Nothing focuses on the specifics of definitive management of subarachnoid, why are we doing this, first that, but some of it's just kind of a general critical care overview decision making. So I usually, when I teach stuff, I usually kind of teach more through example as opposed to like actual topics. So for a ventilator, I was basically just kind of use an ABG, walk through it, talk a little bit about the ventilator, and where we go from there. So before we do ventilator, so for those of you that are only Mount Carmelese people, the only ventilator mode we basically use here is PRVC. That is very unique to here. So if you ever leave here and go somewhere else, pure PRVC is very strange. So the two like real basic vent modes that are used in most hospitals are either ACVC or SIMV. PRVC is a derivation of this. So the other one aside from this is ACPC or pressure control. And then PRVC is like a hybrid of these. So when these vents, like when a ventilator is in this mode or what you see on the screen in this mode, so what you see on a screen is like 50%, 5 of PEEP, some respiratory rate, and then some tidal volume. So that's what you would see on the ventilator for like this up here. This right here, the way the ventilator works is different than this, but this is what you see. So this is actually pressure control. So it's a different type of ventilation. But what it does is it delivers a minimum of 450 milliliters of tidal volume, but the patient can take more. So on true pure ACVC, if this is the setting, the ventilator should cut you off at 450 milliliters. So when you're looking at somebody's ABG, and it's really alkalotic, so say the pH is like 7.55, right? And they're on ACVC, and it's only 450 milliliters, they're usually breathing really fast. On our ventilators, somebody can still be breathing like 18 or 20 mLs, and they can be sucking in 800 milliliters of tidal volume because we don't cut it off. So when you're using our regular ventilator modes and you get an ABG in the middle of the night and their pH is 7.55, it's usually because they're tachypnic and desynchronous with the ventilator. Sometimes it's stuff that we've done to them with diuretics and whatnot, but usually it's the tachypnea in the ventilator. So PRVC, so that's what you're seeing on the ventilator. Sometimes you'll see us put somebody on pressure control. That works a little bit different. You won't see a tidal volume on the ventilator. You see something else, which is the drive pressure. And that's basically, in this ventilator setting, you're basically saying, I want you to give me at least 450 milliliters of tidal volume. In pressure control, when people are really hypoxic, we're not defining what this is. We're defining how much oxygen we're pushing into the lungs or how much pressure we're pushing into the lungs. And this number can be very variable. So this is definitely something that, as a neuro-MP, you're never messing with in the middle of the night. That's purely intensivist driven. But you should at least know that pressure control is something else that could be done on the ventilator. And basically if somebody's on pressure control, that's the time where you shouldn't be, you and the bedside nurse shouldn't be twiddling with stuff. That's when you should be kind of talking to either the overnight guys or one of us if we're here during the day. When we are looking at the vents and you get somebody who has a blood gas of say 7.25, a PCO2 of 58, a PaO2 of 65, and a bicarb of 16, right? So when you're the bedside like nurse practitioner and you're looking at something, you should note that there's multiple things wrong on this. So it's basically the neuro-NPs, you just need to see what's wrong and then kind of, you should have a basic understanding of that. So this patient, so if the pH is below 7.4, the patient's acidotic. You can be acidotic from two different reasons. You can be acidotic from your PaCO2, or you can be acidotic from bicarb. So I did this one this way on purpose. So they're both acidotic from having too much carbon dioxide and from having too little bicarb. So a normal bicarb, a normal PaCO2 is 40, a normal bicarb is 24, a normal pH is 7.4. We do all kinds of stuff up here that makes these in significant aberration. Some of it is done on purpose, some of it is not done on purpose. Outside of kind of the brain ICU units, where you guys care a little bit about the PaCO2 because of what it does to the brain, we will let people's carbon dioxide run high and let their pH run low if we're trying to protect their lungs in the setting of ARDS. So, when I was at Ohio State, people would always have a pH of 7.2, they'd have a PaCO2 of 65, and their PaO2 would be 62, and we would be very happy with that if they had stiff lungs and severe ARDS. Up here, it's a little bit different because you're having to balance the brain and the lungs a little bit here. So, what do I do when I look at this blood gas and I look at this ventilator? So this is the ventilator settings for this blood gas, and, Kim comes and says, fix this. This looks wrong, fix this. So the things that I would do to fix this is you can fix the 58 with the ventilator. So in a ventilator, the two parameters that do oxygenation, so that is FiO2 and PEEP, those are oxygen. And then the I to E ratio, if you have them on pressure control, which is something that's kind of over the scope of this talk, and do oxygen. And then ventilation is the respiratory rate or the tidal volume. Most of the time, if you're not one of the older pulmonologists, you don't mess with the tidal volume. So there's a lot of data that says on a ventilator, even if you don't have ARDS, you shouldn't give people barotrauma. So you shouldn't be giving people large tidal volumes. So when I started here years ago as a CCP, everyone's on like 600 mLs of tidal volume. That's just wrong. Like, we just don't do that anymore. It's been a slow culture shift in this hospital. But most of the time,
I'm not going to tell you what it was when I started. 30 years ago, I mean, people were on 1100 tidal volume,
right.
900 tidal volume.
It sure is comfortable. Boy, it really is comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's bad for your lungs. And so on most ventilators, somebody should be on 6 to 8 milliliters of ideal body weight. So very few people in the state of Ohio are their actual ideal body weight. So that is based off what their height is. So there's tables, and we don't really use them all that much here. We kind of just gestalt it and look at it. When I was at Ohio State, everybody got put on 6 mLs per kg ideal tidal body weight. Basically regardless of what their issue was, they had a table, and the respiratory therapist plugged it in. So you'd be on 320 milliliters of tidal volume, even if you weighed 425 pounds, if you were 4'10". So we don't do that here as much. For the non-ARDS patient, it's not quite as important, but most of us are not really going to usually mess with this. If you have a respiratory therapist at the bedside and it's from the older generation that did a lot of work with Jim and Paresh and Ashok when they were all like young docs and they've been around for a long time, they're going to want to crank this up, right? So, but the sicker the patient gets, when you're getting us more involved, when somebody's more hypoxic, when they're more fluid overloaded, that's the time when we don't want to be increasing that. So most of the time when we're trying to fix excess CO2, we're increasing the respiratory rate. So we're going 14, 16, 18, 24. The issue then becomes, is the respiratory rate, what is the patient breathing, right? So if it's set at 14, but the patient's awake because their propofol's off, and they've been breathing 22 for the entire time, then you have to do something a little bit more creative. The issue also becomes with the patients up here that are unsedated. Sometimes you can have ineffective ventilation if you are desynchronous with the ventilator. So even though your numbers are saying this, you're not necessarily pulling 400 milliliters every single time you should be. But the problem is if you're, hacking and coughing and fighting the vent and you're cutting your breath off every time, you can be breathing 40 times a minute and you're not getting 40 times 450 you're basically pant breathing and you're fighting with the ventilator, so you're ineffectively respirating. So sometimes in these situations, and somebody's really tachypnic, that's when we need to put the propofol back on, because we need to knock them out and we need to take back over control with the ventilator. So that's the time when we have you guys come get your neuro exam, and then we knock them out and we take over control again and get their numbers back in line. So these are the numbers that we can do to fix this. The 16, so that becomes bicarb supplementation. You don't have to supplement bicarb, so not everybody needs a bicarb of 24 if they're on there. But if somebody's got chronic kidney disease or they're in acute renal failure and they're dumping bicarb because their kidneys aren't working, we can always add some bicarb back to the fluids or nephrologies involved in the situation. To fix the 65, so this number is actually perfectly fine, 65. This is a PaO2, this is not an SaO2. So the number that's on the monitor is an SaO2, that's the SAT. The PaO2 is something different. The SaO2 on a blood gas is calculated off the PaO2. So a 65 is fine. So if somebody has ARDS, we strive for 55 and above for a PaO2. Some of the older respiratory therapists, I'll come in and I'll see a blood gas and somebody will be on 60%, and then they'll get this blood gas and the respiratory therapist has bumped them up to 70%. It didn't hurt the patient, it just wasn't really needed to be done. The other issue is, so if you're hypoxic, so say this is 52 or something and you need to get that oxygen up, and you're already on 80% FiO2, then that's when you start going up on the PEEP. And the PEEP is basically